When I was at UCLA, there was a gentleman who was debating that the Holocaust never took place. His point was the Holocaust is a plot by Jewish people to garner Gentile sympathy. That man is out to lunch. The historical evidence is the Holocaust really did take place. The Holocaust is not a myth constructed by Jewish people to garner Gentile sympathy. If anybody were to tell me Muhammad never existed, Muhammad is an Arab myth, I would have to look them in the face and say, you, sir, ma'am, are out to lunch. The historical evidence is Muhammad was a real space-time person who really lived, fought some battles, taught, and authored the Quran. And the Quran has been carefully preserved, and we have a very accurate representation of what Muhammad wrote in the Quran. In the same way, if anybody's going to tell me, oh, Jesus never existed, Jerome made up Jesus, or the Pope in the Middle Ages made up Jesus, I have to look them in the face and say, I'm sorry, you're absolutely wrong. The historical evidence is Jesus of Nazareth was a real space-time person. He really lived a sinless life. He really died on a cross, and 3 days later, the historical evidence is he rose from the dead. That's not my opinion. That's not my belief. That is what the historical evidence points to. If you believe there are moral absolutes, then there's got to be some type of God to create and define those moral absolutes. Okay. Now, if you say there is no God, then I would argue you cannot say to me, my morals are absolutely good. All you can say is, I've embraced some morals and I choose to define those morals as being good.
That's how I live my life. I don't actively participate in any religion. I believe in a God, not necessarily the Christian God, but still, I mean, I have morals that my parents taught me and morals that I've, picked up along the way. I don't believe I need Jesus Christ or, I don't believe I need that particular set of definitions to live my life. I like you said, I believe you can have morals without actively engaging in the belief of and a strong belief of any kind of specific God.
Sure. But why is it wrong to do the opposite of what you believe is moral?
Because I've learned lessons from my parents.
Okay. Good. But if I tell you, sir, my experience tells me that the opposite of your morality is really the best way for me to live my life.
Then I say, all right, that's your belief.
Exactly. And it's just my belief against your belief, right? And all belief is a personal bias, a personal prejudice, right?
Right.
Which means if you think about it, it really doesn't matter what you choose to do. It's all relative. Which means your morals are not really good in any absolute sense. They're just good as you choose to define good. Which means if you choose to do the opposite, you're not doing something really evil. You're just switching your definition of good. Which means if you live your life like Adolf Hitler, or if you live your life like Mother Teresa, ultimately it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's just what you define as being good.
I can still go to sleep at night not believing in Jesus.
Sir, you can go to sleep at night believing whatever you want to believe because you're tired and you go to sleep. All I'm saying is, I hope that you have thought through carefully the logical consequences of your worldview. And I appreciate your honesty. You say, for me, there is no God, but I have my own good morality. But I'm pressing you to realize it's not really good. It's good as you arbitrarily define it as being good, and the opposite is just as legitimate. And if morality is relative, it doesn't matter whether you slit your wrist tonight or whether you go out and feed homeless people. It's all relative. It's all a personal bias. And it doesn't matter whether you use your fine Cal Poly education to gas people in the subway to death or whether you go out and find a cure for cancer. It's just simply an arbitrary decision you make. And my point is, I don't think you do live that out. I don't think you can live that out. Instead, I think you live your life as if your good morality is really good. And that guy who's going around abducting Cal Poly women, boy, that is really evil. And I could hardly wait till we can catch that scoundrel and try him. I think that's the way you live your life.
I'm comfortable with it.
I think it's more than just comfort. I think you got a conscience that informs you, yeah, there's something more to good and evil than just my arbitrary personal bias.
Can or Coke in another can. Are those the exact same thing?
Very, very similar, yes. Coca-Cola
similar, but
bottling
not
is very,
quite.
very consistent in putting Coke in those cans.
Very consistent, but once again, your relativism is showing up again. You could say the exact same thing about rocks, the cracks in there, the air we breathe, the hair on our heads. So why should we put more importance on one subject as opposed to another?
Okay, it's real simple. There's only one way I'm going to get to know who you are, and that is if you choose to open up and tell me your name and tell me what you like and dislike and show me your character. If you don't do that, if you remain silent or if you lie to me, I'm never going to get to know you. Well, the same thing is true with God. If God exists, the only way I'm going to get to know God is if God opens up, tells me God's name, tells me what he likes and dislikes, tells me what his character's like. If God remains silent or if God lies, I'm never going to get to know God. Now, Jesus Christ made this incredible claim to be God, opening up, revealing the truth about who God is. Now, Jesus is either blowing smoke, he's either lying, or else he's speaking the truth. And I think the only way we're going to ascertain whether he's blowing smoke or speaking the truth is by checking him out, reading the Gospels.
He's dead.
No, man, he rose from the dead.
Human beings wrote that. Jerome in the 4th century edited the Bible and cut out certain things that he didn't want in there. There are other parts and variants of the Catholic Bible and the Christian Bible where parts of the story are left out, such as Jonah. In the Catholic Bible, I believe it's in the back. It's under this hidden area. So how can you say there's this study of hermeneutics talking about human interpretation of the Bible and biblical norms? Are those ethically relative at those times or relative now? What about sexism in the Bible? Was it relative back then or now? Were they incorrect or are we incorrect now? Is it in our interpretations using normal values of the 20th century applied to the Christian Bible that are different? Or are we all just screwed up? Is it just relativism? How can we trust what's written?
Well, let me ask you. If I stand out here and say, I'm a follower of Christ, if I tell you I take Jesus seriously, I go up to this person, punch him in the face, knock him out, steal their money, what are you going to say to me?
You believe in the writings of other people writing about Jesus. It's a second-generation copy. It's been translated and misconstrued, potentially. So I'm going to say that you don't know exactly what he said specifically.
Let me phrase it another way. If I say I'm a follower of Christ, and after I finish speaking out here, I go out and womanize, what are you going to say to me?
That you womanized.
You're not going to use the word hypocrite?
Depending on what your own interpretations of the Bible are, which varies from person to person, like you pointed out before, if you want to state that your beliefs say that it's incorrect, then yes, I would say that you are being hypocritical.
You mean you're going to be confronted by a guy who gets on television, preaches about Jesus, and then goes out and womanizes and rips people's money off, and you're going to be cool on that and say, well, it's just a matter of interpretation?
Sure.
Oh, come on. Come on. If I say I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and Asians and African Americans are inferior to Caucasians, you're not going to use the word hypocrite to describe me?
If you explain that every single one of your beliefs, and it says in the Bible, under your belief system, that it is incorrect to treat people of different races or colors incorrectly, and you believe in that, then yes, you would be a hypocrite.
Sir, I like what Mark Twain said. Mark Twain said, it ain't the parts of the Bible I don't understand that disturb me. It's the parts of the Bible I do understand that disturb me. And you know very well, you don't need a PhD in hermeneutics. You don't need a PhD in New Testament studies to know that if someone claims to be a follower of Christ and they go out and womanize, they go out and rip people's money off, they go out and have racist attitudes, that they are being hypocritical. Because clearly in the Gospels, Jesus says, put your faith in me and do not commit adultery, do not commit fornication, do not have a racist attitude, and don't steal people's money. Instead, respect people and love people, and show it by the way you treat them. Please, come on, let's be honest with each other.
It's an emotive statement that you're making right now.
Emotive. It's called reality, sir.
If you want to consider it that way, it's a 20th century emotivist standpoint. when you're taking basic values, adding facts to that, and coming up with your own moral conclusions.
No,
You
sir.
agree about the facts that
I'm
are
not
going
talking
on,
about
but your
any
basic
20th
values-
century phenomena. In the first century, the followers of Jesus Christ shared their bed with nobody and their money with everybody. And that was in stark contrast to the culture that they lived in, where people shared their bed with everybody and their money with nobody. And I can promise you 2,000 years later, followers of Christ who are committed to Christ share their bed with nobody except their spouse, but they share their money with everybody. They're generous. And for you to tell me that's a culturally relative bias that we've laid on Jesus Christ is totally erroneous. Read the Gospels. Jesus is brutally clear. Sexual impurity is wrong. Being generous with your money and sharing with God's unfed children is very good.
We talked about the first criteria, the internal consistency.
Yes.
Can you explain some of the? Do you hold that the Bible as a document? You would take that document as beginning from Genesis all the way to the end of the Gospels.
All the way to Revelation.
So you would expect consistencies between the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Yes, sir.
So how do you explain certain laws that I believe even Jesus himself followed that Christians today don't follow, such as circumcision, dietary laws, and other stuff like that?
You bet. When you read the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament, there are a truckload of laws in there. And the main point is God is holy, and he's calling these Jewish people to be separate from all the cultures around them and to be holy. Holy means morally pure, but it also means separate. And so he's calling a people out to be separate. And by gollies, when they followed those laws in Leviticus, they were definitely different. Separate from all the peoples around them. Then you read the Gospels in the book of Acts, and you see that Gentiles begin to put their faith in Christ. And obviously one of the disputes in the first century church was, when Gentiles put their faith in Jesus, do they have to keep kosher kitchens? Do they have to hold to all the laws that we as Jews do? And the clear decision of the first century eyewitnesses of Christ was, no, Gentiles do not have to become cultural Jews and follow all those laws, but they do have to follow the moral law of God, like the Ten Commandments that Jesus reiterates in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. So you're right, there was a struggle there. And Peter had to be confronted by Paul. In the book of Galatians, Paul writes, when Peter started separating himself from the Gentiles, because they weren't all circumcised, like all the Jews were. So you're right, that change is recorded.
You want to look at all these different religions and decide on one and follow that. But before you really accept Jesus and before you actually look into it, you should have a criteria for which one are you going to accept and why. So can you go through maybe some of the criteria? You already mentioned that in order to really know God in the Islamic faith, you have to read Arabic. So you said you had a philosophical problem with that. It seems like one of your criteria is ease of readability or ease of getting to know God. So I just want you to go through maybe what your criteria is before we really think about why Jesus. How does Jesus fit in that criteria?
Okay, great question. My point about having a problem with having to learn Arabic in order to know God is not just out of the blue, I got a problem with that. Rather, it begins with the incredible respect that the Quran communicates for Jesus. Muhammad taught that Jesus was a prophet of God. In fact, a devout Muslim has far more respect for Jesus than the typical American. A devout Muslim believes Jesus was born of a virgin, ascended to heaven, and is coming back a second time. That's a lot more than a lot of Americans believe. So a devout Muslim has far more respect for Jesus than the typical American. But you see, my philosophical problem is this. Jesus comes and says, I'm for the world. Come to me. You don't have to learn Greek or Aramaic. Come to me. And Muslims respect him and say, that's good, that's good. But then they say the real miracle is the Quran. And in order to really understand the real miracle of God, you have to learn Arabic. Well, how can you move from Jesus, who's for the whole world, to saying, come to me, in any language? All of a sudden you move to Arabic saying, okay, you got to really learn Arabic in order to understand a miracle of God. That's the internal inconsistency.
What are some of the other criteria that you have for deciding on which one is reliable? Because you said you have to have your sources being reliable. So how do you construct a criteria for that source being reliable as opposed to another? Because all of them...
Good. I insist that both the Quran and the New Testament give us very accurate, historically fair presentations of both Muhammad and Jesus. What's the criteria that I personally use to determine credibility of a historical document?
And not just for the Quran and the New Testament,
For
but
anything.
also for the Old Testament and for Buddha and for Confucius and all
You
that.
bet. You bet. Whenever I'm confronted by a document that claims to be historical, I'm a skeptic, but not a cynic. I don't reject history as bunk. That's why I would debate someone who says the Holocaust never took place. It's just a Jewish plot. No, we can know something historically. Now, I've got 4 tests that I use to determine historicity. If you don't like my tests, I promise I won't take it personally, but I will press you. You come up with your own tests that you use consistently. My 4 tests are internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence. First one, internal consistency. I read the document. If there are major contradictions within the document, I question its reliability. But when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll notice there's a tremendous internal consistency. Second test, literary style. Is the document couched in the following type of language? Once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wink and Blink and Nod took a boat ride. That's fairy tale. That's what that literary style is. The literary style of the Gospels is, at this time, in this place, with these people around, this took place. That's historical narrative.
But isn't Genesis written the first way?
Good.
It says, in the beginning there was this, and then there was, and it doesn't really, it's very poetic. It actually repeats that God says this was good, and it's more.
You are absolutely correct. Great point. Genesis chapter 1 is comprised of 8 4-line Hebrew poems. Very good. You read well. That's why I would not treat Genesis chapter 1 as historical narrative, because that's not the literary style. And you go to the Psalms, and it's all poetry, isn't it? And you go to the book of Revelation, and it's apocalyptic literature. That sure is not historical narrative. That's apocalyptic, highly symbolic literature, Revelation. But the Gospels, where we read about Jesus, are historical narrative. At this time, he did this. He said that. We saw him. But the Gospels do contain parable, allegory, simile, metaphor. When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, he's not claiming to be a 100-watt light bulb. I mean, that's not fair. You've got to allow him to use allegories, metaphor. Okay. The third one is archaeology. Are we talking about the island of Atlantis? No, we're talking about Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, Rome. And the fourth one is manuscript evidence. How many manuscripts and how close to the date of the actual writing of the document are they? The New Testament that we have today has nothing to do with the Latin Vulgate of Jerome. The New Testament that we have today in English is based on over 5,200 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript dated from the 1st through the 10th century AD, found from Rome, Italy, down around the Mediterranean to Alexandria, Egypt, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. There's no document from antiquity that can even approach the New Testament Gospels in manuscript evidence. That's why I accept it as historically reliable. But so do I do that with the Quran. The Quran is a very accurate presentation of what Muhammad taught. And the teachings of the Buddha have been very accurately preserved. And the Vedas and Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita of Hinduism, very accurate. I mean, people went to painstaking ends to accurately transmit these documents. So read them. And while you read them, ask yourself, what does the evidence point to as being reliable?
How do you defend an infinite amount of punishment, hell, for a finite amount of crime?
Okay? God has given us this incredible gift of life. God has given us more than enough evidence of his existence. God has given us a conscience that convicts us when we do wrong and we experience something called guilt. And Jesus in the Bible insists that guilt is God's alarm system. Wake up and smell the coffee. You've done wrong. You need forgiveness. The only reason a person doesn't find God is for the same reason that a criminal does not find a policeman. He's running away. That's the claim of the scriptures. Now, if a person runs away from God all life long, God is not going to force them against their will to spend eternity with him in heaven. Heaven would be worse than hell for that person. They want to live their life separate from God. So as G.K. Chesterton, the great English thinker, put it, hell is God's great complement to the reality of human freedom and the dignity of human choice.
Why would anyone choose free choice if they know then that they're going to, as a matter of choice, decide to have eternal torment? It's not worth it.
Why do certain university students smoke cigarettes in light of the fact that there's a clear warning on the package? Smoking cigarettes can cause cancer. We are an interesting group, we Homo sapiens.
But you don't choose free choice.
Right, you were just given it as a gift.
Isn't your faith in Christianity, isn't that just a personal bias? What makes other religions not as correct?
Great question. If one of my children is sick, I go into the medicine chest in the bathroom, pull out a bottle of poison, and give the content of that bottle to my sick child. I don't care how sincere, how genuine I am. My child will not get well after digesting that poison. My child will get sicker and possibly die. I don't care how sincere I am. The legitimacy of your belief is not based on your sincerity. You can be sincerely wrong, sir. The legitimacy of your belief is based on the legitimacy of the object that you have chosen to trust in. So the question is Jesus Christ reliable or is he not? Is Buddha reliable or is he not? Is Confucius reliable or is he not? Is Muhammad reliable or is he not? That's the question. And I think the only way you're going to answer that, obviously, is by studying each one that you are considering to be a serious option for your consideration. And I'm standing here saying, please consider Jesus Christ very seriously by going to the source documents, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, reading them, and asking yourself, does the evidence point to Christ being reliable, or does the evidence point to him being unreliable?
That's a very good point, and I
Thank
hope.
you.
But I have people who tell me, Christians, that people who take their faith seriously in Muhammad or other people, they're wrong. And I don't.
That's absolutely correct. If Muhammad spoke the truth, I am wrong in believing in Jesus. If the avatars of Hinduism spoke the truth, I am in for a very difficult next reincarnation. No question about it. If Muhammad spoke the truth, I'm going straight to hell. Because I'm a blasphemer. I worship Jesus Christ as God in human form. So if Muhammad spoke the truth, I'm going to hell. But if Jesus Christ spoke the truth, I'm going to heaven because I put my faith and trust in him.
But isn't all it is then? Doesn't it all that comes down to is a personal bias?
No, it comes down to what is true, what is real.
To you.
No, in reality.
To
Using
you.
Pascal.
Okay, fine. Then approach your next exam that way. Go into your next exam, allow the real you to genuinely flow out all over that exam paper. And then when your professor hands back a flunking grade, you go back to your professor and say, time out, professor. This is the real me. This is my perception of reality. This is who I really am. And the professor's going to look you in the face and say, your perception of reality is incorrect. You just flunked the exam.
You're choosing Pascal's wager. You're going for the benefits of one over the other, and you're saying that an infinite reward is much better than an infinite punishment. So you're going to go for, that's exactly what you're saying.
It is not. No, it is not. I'll get into Pascal's wager with you if you want, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying to this gentleman is, the legitimacy of my belief is not determined by my sincerity. It's not determined by my passion or my fervency. It is determined by the reliability of the object I've placed my faith in. You put your faith in Jimmy Jones and follow him down to Guyana and drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid, and you can be very genuine. I would argue you're genuinely wrong. Sincerely wrong. You can follow David Koresh down to Waco, Texas, and get blown up in an inferno with him. You can be very sincere and very genuine. I would argue you're genuinely wrong. You can follow Hugh Hefner's philosophy and could be convinced that the real purpose of life is to stimulate your nerve endings and go through orgasm as many times as you can. I am convinced you're making a humongous mistake. There's a lot more to human existence than going through orgasm. And yet if you want to believe that, that's your choice, obviously. I respect your right to choose that, but I am deeply concerned. Or you can believe that the real purpose of life is to get a good education at Cal Poly, to get the highest paying job possible you can. So you can have your nice house, drive your nice car, and have your nice vacation, one on the shore and one in the mountain skiing. And I'm going to say to you, sir, I am deeply concerned about materialism. I don't think it tells the whole story. I think you're mistaken in putting your faith in materialism.
The object you place your legitimacy is based on how much faith you have in it.
Yeah, now the question is the object of your faith reliable, Or is the object of your faith going to mess you up? And what's a midlife crisis? A midlife crisis is a guy who thought the real purpose of my life was to climb the corporate ladder, to have a high-paying job, to have it all materially. And here I am, in my 50s, and now suddenly I begin to realize, oops, there's more to life than making money. There's more to life than a nice vacation. Oops, I'm going through a midlife crisis because I've leaned the ladder of my life up against the wrong wall. It ain't delivering the goods the way I thought when I was in university.
I'd like to invite you to Grace Community Church, located at 365 Lukeswood Road in New Canaan, Connecticut. Our services are at 9:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. on Sundays. Hope you can join us.